Florence, Colorado, 100 miles south of Denver, surrounded by 12 gun towers and sprawling across 37 acres of high desert, sits America's only federal Supermax prison. Inside ADX Florence, 490 men live in 7 by 12-foot concrete cells for 23 hours every single day. No human contact, no conversation, no touch, no sunlight they can actually see. Just concrete, steel, and silence. Forever. Former Warden Robert Hood calls it a tomb, a mausoleum. People are there to die. A clean version of hell. The United Nations calls it torture. Medical experts say extended isolation causes permanent psychological damage within days. But at ADX Florence, men stay buried in solitary confinement for years, decades. Some will die there, having spent more time alone in concrete boxes than most people spend in relationships. This is the Alcatraz of the Rockies, and inside, prisoners don't just serve time. They go insane. Jack Powers, a bank robber sent to ADX after escaping from another prison, spent 12 years in total isolation. The experience destroyed his mind so completely that he amputated his own fingers, earlobes, testicle, and scrotum. He drilled a hole in his own skull. He tried to kill himself multiple times. He had no history of mental illness before ADX. The prison made him insane. This is the story of what happens inside America's most secure prison, told through 24 hours in solitary confinement, where the punishment isn't death. It's slow psychological annihilation. Welcome to ADX Florence, where prisoners go to lose their minds. Before we go inside America's only federal Supermax, where isolation drives prisoners to mutilate themselves and lose their sanity, hit that subscribe button right now. We document the most extreme prison stories that expose how broken the system really is. Turn on notifications because what you're about to see inside ADX Florence will shock you. Now let's descend into the Alcatraz of the Rockies and see how 23 hours of daily solitary confinement destroys human minds. ADX Florence opened January 10, 1995, built specifically in response to the October 22, 1983 murders of 2 correctional officers at USP Marion in Illinois. Thomas Silverstein and Clayton Fountain, Aryan Brotherhood members, fatally stabbed guards Merle Klutz and Robert Hoffman. Prison officials realized they needed a facility designed to hold prisoners so dangerous, so violent, so escape-prone that no other prison could contain them. The solution: total isolation, complete sensory deprivation, architectural control so absolute that inmates cannot see the sky, cannot hear other voices, cannot touch another human being for years at a time. Cost: $60 million. Capacity: 490 male inmates, each assigned to one of 6 security levels. The facility's unofficial nickname, Alcatraz of the Rockies, is fitting. Like the original Alcatraz, ADX is designed to be escape-proof. Unlike Alcatraz, which closed because it was considered too harsh, ADX remains operational 30 years later, housing America's worst: terrorists, serial killers, gang leaders, spies, prisoners who murdered other inmates or guards. El Chapo Guzman, who escaped from 2 Mexican prisons. Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber. Ramzi Youssef, 1993 World Trade Center bomber. Zacarias Moussaoui, 9/11 conspirator. Robert Hansen, FBI agent turned Soviet spy. Boston Marathon bomber Jakar Tsarnaev. These men, deemed too dangerous for regular maximum security prisons, live in concrete tombs until they die. But the majority of ADX inmates aren't famous terrorists. They're regular prisoners who committed violence in other prisons, who escaped from custody, who were deemed management concerns. And all of them, famous or not, endure the same punishment: permanent solitary confinement in what experts universally agree constitutes psychological torture. 6 a.m. Inside ADX Florence, in a cell identical to 489 others, an inmate wakes on a concrete slab covered with a thin mattress. The cell is 7 feet by 12 feet, poured concrete on all sides. Concrete bed. Concrete desk. Concrete stool. Stainless steel toilet and sink combination unit bolted to the wall. One window, 42 inches high, 4 inches wide, positioned so the inmate cannot see outside, cannot see the sky, can only see a sliver of light that tells him day exists somewhere beyond these walls. The cell has a small shower with a timer to prevent flooding. The door is solid steel with a slot for food trays and handcuffs. Through this slot, the inmate can see nothing. Just a cement wall 3 feet away. By design, the architecture is the control. Every element engineered to prevent human contact, to eliminate sensory input, to create complete isolation. Inmate Travis Dusenbury, who served 10 years at ADX, describes it. It's just the harshest place you've ever seen. Nothing living, not so much as a blade of grass anywhere. My cell was all concrete. Every single thing made out of concrete. The walls, floor, the desk, the sink, even the bed, a slab of concrete. The inmate sits up on his concrete bed. 23 hours until his 1 hour out. 23 hours staring at concrete walls, alone with his thoughts, no stimulation, no human voice, no touch, nothing. Former ADX inmate Tommy Silverstein, who spent decades in isolation, once said, "This is worse than death. This is living death." At ADX, that's not hyperbole. That's Tuesday, 7 a.m. Breakfast arrives through the slot in the steel door. Correctional Officer Martinez approaches the cell, metal tray in hand. He slides it through the narrow opening without making eye contact, without speaking. The inmate takes the tray, powdered eggs, cold toast, small carton of juice. This is the only human interaction the inmate will have today. A hand passing food through a slot. No words. No eye contact. Nothing. Officer Martinez walks away. His job is to deliver meals and maintain security. Not to talk. Not to connect. The Bureau of Prisons explicitly trains ADX staff to minimize interaction. According to a 2014 Amnesty International report, ADX prisoners routinely go days with only a few words spoken to them. Days without hearing a human voice. Days without speaking aloud except to themselves. The inmate eats his breakfast slowly, mechanically. Taste doesn't matter. The food is fuel, nothing more. Everything tastes like nothing after years of eating the same meals in the same concrete box. He finishes, sets the tray by the door slot, waits for Officer Martinez to retrieve it. The slot opens. The tray disappears. The slot closes. 7:30 a.m. now. 15 and a half hours until the next meal. 22 and a half hours until the next human interaction. Brief as it is. The inmate returns to his concrete bed and stares at the concrete ceiling. What does he think about? Everything. Nothing. Memory becomes distorted in isolation. Past and present blur. Thoughts circle endlessly with no external stimuli to interrupt them. This is what ADX does. It traps you alone with your mind until your mind breaks. Jack Powers had no history of mental illness when he entered federal prison in 1990 for bank robbery. He was a regular criminal, not violently insane. Then in 2001, after escaping from another prison, he was sent to ADX Florence. Control Unit. The most restrictive section. 24 hours a day in a concrete cell. No contact with other humans. No stimulation. No hope of release for years. Within months, Powers began deteriorating. Insomnia. Anxiety attacks. Post-traumatic stress disorder. Prison psychologists diagnosed him as mentally ill. But instead of treatment, he stayed in isolation. The BOP policy: monitor him, but don't move him. Powers stayed in the control unit for 12 years. And during those 12 years, Jack Powers went insane. He bit off his own finger. He amputated his own testicle and scrotum with whatever sharp objects he could create. He sliced his earlobes off. He tattooed his face and head with a razor blade until he looked in his own words, like an avatar. He tried to inject bacteria into his brain. He drilled a hole in his own skull. He attempted suicide multiple times. Prison staff documented everything. They watched him mutilate himself again and again, and they left him in solitary confinement. When Powers was finally released from ADX to a regular prison population in 2013, he wrote, "Everything seems surreal. It's like I am dissociated, floating around in a fog. After so many years of silence, loud noise makes me instantly stressed. I feel like mutilating myself again. I feel like committing suicide. The damage was permanent." ADX Florence didn't just punish Jack Powers. It destroyed him psychologically, turning a bank robber with no mental illness into a permanently traumatized, self-mutilating shell of a human being. And he's not unique. ADX is full of Jack Powers. ADX Florence has 6 housing units with varying security levels, but the control unit is the most severe. 78 cells. Inmates isolated at all times, including recreation. 23 to 24 hours per day in cells. Behavior assessed monthly. Within the control unit exists Range 13, a special 4-cell wing for inmates in need of the tightest control. As of 2024, the only publicly known inmates in Range 13 are Ramzi Youssef and Joaquin El Chapo Guzman. El Chapo, the legendary Mexican drug lord who escaped from 2 maximum security Mexican prisons using elaborate tunnels, now lives in a 7 by 12-foot concrete cell with no contact with other humans. No phone calls. No visits. No sky visible through his window. Former Warden Robert Hood describes Range 13. You have no contact, you don't speak to anybody, and it's a form of torture on some level. El Chapo will die in that cell. He's serving life plus 30 years with no possibility of parole. He's 67 years old. He'll likely spend the next 20 years in total isolation, slowly going insane like every other long-term ADX inmate, with no human touch, no conversation, no connection to the world he once dominated. The man who ruled a drug empire, who commanded armies, who escaped inescapable prisons, now lives in a concrete tomb where his only power is the ability to pace 7 feet in one direction and 12 feet in the other. 23 hours a day. For the rest of his life. ADX breaks everyone. Famous or not. Powerful or not. Everyone. Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber, spent 26 years at ADX Florence before dying in June 2023 at age 81. Unlike many ADX inmates who deteriorated psychologically, Kaczynski adapted. A mathematical prodigy with an IQ over 160, Kaczynski used isolation the way he'd used his remote Montana cabin. For thinking, writing, reading. He wrote prolifically. He maintained correspondence with supporters. He read voraciously, requesting books through the prison library. In a rare 1999 interview from ADX, Kaczynski said the isolation was difficult, but manageable because I'm used to being alone. But even Kaczynski, with his genius intellect and decades of experience living in isolation by choice, couldn't entirely escape ADX's effects. In later years, guards reported finding him talking to himself, pacing his cell repetitively, displaying symptoms of cognitive decline beyond normal aging. The difference between Kaczynski and other ADX inmates isn't that isolation didn't affect him. It's that he had intellectual resources most inmates lack. Education, purpose, communication skills that allowed him to maintain sanity longer than others. But ADX got him eventually too. He died in his cell, alone, having spent 26 years in solitary confinement. His last years showed the same deterioration every long-term ADX inmate experiences. Memory problems, paranoia, cognitive decline. Even genius cannot withstand decades of complete isolation. The human brain needs stimulation, needs connection, needs purpose. ADX provides none of these. Even the Unabomber, who chose isolation in Montana, couldn't fully adapt to forced isolation at ADX. 10 a.m. For 1 hour today, the inmate will leave his cell for recreation. Not recreation as normal people understand it. Recreation at ADX means transfer from small concrete box to slightly larger concrete cage. Officer Martinez arrives with handcuffs and leg shackles. Turn around. Hands through the slot. The inmate complies. Cuffs click shut around his wrists. Step back. Door opening. The steel door opens. 2 officers escort the inmate, shackled and cuffed, down a corridor to the recreation area. A small cage, maybe 20 feet square, surrounded by high concrete walls with chain link fencing overhead. No view of anything except concrete and sky. No equipment. No basketball hoop. No weights. Just empty concrete. You have 1 hour, Officer Martinez says. The cuffs and shackles come off. The cage door locks. The officers leave. The inmate is alone in the cage. He can walk. He can do push-ups. He can run in tiny circles. He can stare at the small patch of sky visible through the chain link. Travis Dusenbury describes ADX recreation. You get a little fortified cage that's outside that you get to go walk around in for an hour a day. It ain't no lollygagging solitary confinement. It's 22, 23 hours in this concrete room, then 1 hour in this fenced-in area. Sometimes recreation is canceled. 2 days a week there was no rec, and sometimes they just canceled it for no reason. Some inmates refuse recreation. After years of isolation, the transition from cell to cage is stressful. The space is too big, too exposed. Some inmates feel safer in their 7 by 12-foot cells where everything is familiar and controlled. The hour passes. Officers return. Cuffs. Shackles. Walk back to cell. Door closes. Back to 23 hours of concrete and silence. 12 p.m. Lunch arrives through the slot. The inmate eats. This is his 3rd human interaction today. Hand passing tray through slot, taking tray back. 0 words exchanged. According to former inmates, some ADX prisoners go entire weeks without speaking to anyone, without hearing a human voice except their own. Travis Dusenbury says he went days where only a few words were spoken to him. Days of complete silence except the sounds of his own breathing, his own footsteps, his own voice when he talks to himself. Which he does, constantly, because the alternative, pure silence, is unbearable. The human brain needs language, needs communication. Without it, language skills deteriorate. Former ADX inmate Jack Powers, after release to regular prison population, noted, "My conversational skills aren't that good. I'm talking too slowly and pausing too often to gather my thoughts." 12 years of isolation had damaged his ability to speak, to process communication, to interact normally. Other former ADX inmates report similar deterioration, forgetting common words, struggling to form sentences, losing the ability to maintain conversations. The brain, deprived of linguistic stimulation for years, literally forgets how to communicate. At ADX, silence isn't punishment. Silence becomes reality. Language becomes theoretical. The inmate in his cell might not have spoken aloud to another human in days, weeks, months. He talks to himself. He thinks in words. But actual communication, actual language exchange with another person, that might not happen for months at ADX. And when it does happen, a rare chaplain visit, a mental health check via video conference, a disciplinary hearing, inmates struggle to articulate thoughts, to respond appropriately, to function linguistically like humans should. Isolation doesn't just trap the body. It erases communication skills that took a lifetime to develop. 2 p.m. 14 hours into a 24-hour cycle. The inmate lies on his concrete bed, staring at the concrete ceiling. Nothing has happened today except breakfast, recreation, and lunch. Nothing will happen for the next 10 hours except dinner. This is every day at ADX. Same routine, same concrete, Same silence. Same isolation. Same nothing. Dr. Stuart Gracian, a psychiatrist who studied isolation effects, identified SHU syndrome in 1993, a constellation of symptoms caused by prolonged solitary confinement. Symptoms include severe anxiety, panic attacks, paranoia, perceptual distortions, hallucinations, cognitive dysfunction, depression, suicidal ideation, self-mutilation, and full psychotic breaks. According to Gracian, these symptoms can develop within hours of isolation. Hours, not years. ADX inmates endure years, decades. The inmate in this cell is experiencing some or all of these symptoms right now. Maybe he's hallucinating, seeing faces in the concrete patterns, hearing voices that aren't there. Maybe he's paranoid, convinced the staff is poisoning his food, plotting against him, watching him through hidden cameras. Maybe he's experiencing perceptual distortions, feeling like the walls are closing in, like time is moving too fast or too slow, like his body is disconnected from his mind. Maybe he's dissociating, floating above himself, watching himself from outside his body, feeling like nothing is real. These aren't character weaknesses. These are universal psychological responses to extended isolation. The human brain cannot function properly without stimulation, without social contact, without environmental variability. ADX provides none of these. So the brain malfunctions, creates false stimuli through hallucinations, develops paranoia to explain the absence of human contact, dissociates to escape unbearable reality. The inmate isn't weak. He's human, and ADX is breaking him exactly as it's designed to. We're halfway through a 24-hour cycle at ADX Florence, where isolation destroys minds in ways experts call torture. Jack Powers amputated his own body parts. Travis Dusenbury lost the ability to speak normally. Inmates hallucinate, self-mutilate, and go permanently insane. If this is shocking you, hit that like button and comment. Is 23 hours of daily solitary confinement torture or necessary security? Should ADX exist? Keep watching as we see what happens when night falls and the psychological breakdown intensifies. ADX has 2 intermediate units for step-down inmates who might earn transfer to less restrictive facilities. After years in complete isolation, inmates who maintain clear conduct records can enter the step-down program. Slightly less restrictive conditions. 2 to 7 inmates together instead of total isolation. Access to a larger recreation yard where you can see the sky. Ability to walk without shackles in limited areas. For ADX inmates, this feels like paradise. Jack Powers entered the step-down program after 5 years in isolation. He describes it, "I made it into the step-down program, which was next to where they had a larger yard, so you could see the sky. You were with 2 to 7 people at a time, instead of just yourself. I'm a people person, and before long, I was hugging other inmates. After 5 years alone, human touch, even a hug from another inmate, was overwhelming." Powers was socializing, adjusting, preparing for eventual transfer out of ADX. Then he got into an argument with another inmate. Guards separated them. Shortly after, administration deemed Powers unfit for the program, saying he had failed to adjust. He was sent back to complete isolation in the control unit. After 6 months of human contact, Powers was buried alive again. The psychological whiplash was devastating. Taste freedom, then lose it. Experience human touch again, then be denied it. See the sky, then be locked back in a windowless concrete box. Powers spent another 7 years in total isolation after that. The step-down program is technically available, but most inmates never qualify or lose qualification for minor infractions. The promise of less restrictive conditions keeps inmates compliant. The reality is most will die at ADX, having never successfully stepped down, having spent decades in isolation waiting for a transfer that never comes. 5 p.m. Dinner arrives through the slot. The inmate eats. Same routine as breakfast and lunch. No words. No eye contact. Just food passed through a slot by a hand attached to a person he cannot see. By design, meals at ADX are engineered to prevent human interaction. Former inmates describe how even the food itself is restricted, to ensure that the food cannot be used to harm themselves or to create unhygienic conditions in their cell. Everything is controlled, calculated, designed to prevent any deviation from complete isolation. Some inmates refuse meals. Depression, common at ADX, kills appetite. Why eat when there's nothing to live for, no hope of release, no end to the concrete tomb? Some starve themselves slowly, refusing food day after day until medical staff force feeds them. Others eat compulsively, the only pleasure available in a life devoid of any other sensation. Food becomes obsession because food is the only variable in an otherwise unchanging existence. The inmate finishes dinner, sets the tray by the slot. Officer Martinez retrieves it. The slot closes. That's it. That's the last human interaction today. From 5 p.m. until 7 a.m. tomorrow, 14 hours, the inmate will see no one, hear no voice, have no contact with another living human. 14 hours of complete isolation. Every night at ADX is 14 hours of nothing. And some inmates spend not just one night, but thousands of nights. 12 years is 4,380 nights. Each night, 14 hours of isolation. That's 61,320 hours alone in the dark. For Jack Powers, who spent 12 years at ADX, that's 61,320 hours of nothingness. How does the human mind survive that? 7 p.m. Most ADX cells have small televisions, a concession to prevent complete sensory deprivation. Inmates who maintain clear conduct can watch TV for a few hours each evening. Limited channels. Heavily monitored content. But it's something. It's stimulation. It's voices, even if they're coming from a screen. It's faces, even if they're two-dimensional. For inmates drowning in isolation, television becomes lifeline to sanity. But it's also a window into a world they'll never experience again. Commercials for vacations they'll never take. Shows about families they'll never have. News about events they'll never participate in. Life happening somewhere else without them. Some inmates can't handle it. Watching television reminds them of everything they've lost, everything they'll never have again. They turn it off and sit in silence, preferring emptiness to painful reminders of the world outside. Other inmates watch obsessively, every show, every channel, drowning themselves in artificial human contact because it's the only contact available. Travis Dusenbury mentions TV in his description of ADX, noting cells have televisions, but he doesn't elaborate on whether they helped or hurt his psychological state. For Jack Powers, who spent years mutilating himself in isolation, television probably felt irrelevant. What's the point of watching people live normal lives when you're drilling holes in your own skull? The inmate in this cell is watching television right now. Maybe a sitcom. Maybe news. Maybe a documentary about normal people doing normal things in the normal world. And he's staring at the screen from his concrete bed in his concrete cell in his concrete tomb. And he's wondering if this is real or if he's hallucinating again. In isolation, the line between reality and delusion blurs. Maybe the television is real. Maybe it's another trick his broken mind is playing on him. 9 p.m. Lights in ADX, cells dim but never fully darken. 24-hour surveillance requires constant visibility. Even at night, fluorescent lights glow, casting harsh shadows on concrete walls. The inmate lies on his concrete bed trying to sleep. Sleep at ADX is difficult. Insomnia is universal among long-term solitary inmates. Without natural sleep-wake cycles, without physical exhaustion from activity, without mental tiredness from stimulation, the body doesn't know when to sleep. Some inmates sleep during the day and stay awake all night. Some sleep in brief fragments, never deeply. Some develop severe insomnia, going days without sleep until they collapse. Jack Powers developed insomnia in ADX. So did countless others. Dr. Stuart Grashan's research shows sleep disturbances are among the first symptoms of isolation-induced psychosis. The brain, deprived of normal stimulation during waking hours, cannot properly regulate sleep. Dreams become nightmares. Or reality becomes dreamlike. The boundary dissolves. The inmate in this cell might not sleep tonight. He might lie awake until 3 a.m., staring at the ceiling, listening to silence, trapped in his own thoughts. Or he might fall asleep and dream he's free, then wake at 6 a.m. to concrete walls and remember he's still buried alive. Both scenarios are torture. Both are every night at ADX. Former Warden Robert Hood, who oversaw ADX from 2002 to 2005, says, "The Supermax is life after death. It's long-term. In my opinion, it's far much worse than death." Hood should know. He ran the place. He saw what happened to men kept in isolation year after year. And even he, the warden, concluded that ADX inflicts something worse than death. Living death. Permanent psychological annihilation. Conscious burial. Midnight at ADX. Some nights, the silence breaks. An inmate somewhere in the facility starts screaming. Wordless, primal screaming. The sound echoes through corridors, bouncing off concrete. Other inmates hear it through their solid steel doors, muffled but unmistakable. Someone is breaking. Someone is going insane. And everyone knows it could be them next. Guards respond. The screaming inmate is subdued, possibly medicated, possibly placed in even more restrictive conditions if such a thing exists. The screaming stops. Silence returns. But the message is delivered. ADX breaks people. Regularly. Predictably. Jack Powers, during his 12 years at ADX, heard inmates screaming regularly. He heard them crying. He heard them begging. And, eventually, he became one of them. He writes about his time at ADX. "The self-injury was pretty much my overall response to being locked down inside the ADX control unit for more than a decade. Amputating his fingers, testicle, scrotum. Drilling into his skull. Suicide attempts. These weren't rational acts. They were responses to unbearable psychological torture. The screaming at midnight is the same. It's the sound of human minds shattering under pressure no mind was designed to withstand. Some nights there's no screaming, just silence. But the silence is worse because it means everyone is suffering alone, quietly, without even the release of screaming. The inmate in this cell might be the one screaming tonight. Or he might be listening to someone else scream and thinking, tomorrow it might be me. Former inmates report that the screaming haunted them more than anything else at ADX. Knowing that other men were going insane in cells just like theirs. Knowing they were next. 2 a.m. In a different cell, an inmate has attempted suicide. Guards discovered him during a routine check. He'd fashioned a noose from a bedsheet and tried to hang himself from the concrete desk. He failed. Now he's in a suicide prevention cell, completely bare except for a concrete slab and a suicide-proof blanket. 24-hour camera surveillance. Guards checking every 15 minutes. This is how ADX handles suicide attempts. Increased isolation. Remove everything from the cell. Watch constantly. Wait for the suicidal ideation to pass. Then return the inmate to normal isolation. The problem: isolation caused the suicide attempt in the first place. More isolation doesn't fix suicidal depression. It intensifies it. But ADX has no other solution. The Bureau of Prisons cannot move every suicidal ADX inmate to a mental health facility. There are too many. A 2012 class action lawsuit, Cunningham v. BOP, revealed that ADX was housing severely mentally ill prisoners in isolation without proper treatment. Prisoners who were hallucinating, self-harming, attempting suicide. The lawsuit resulted in a settlement in 2016 requiring ADX to transfer some of the most mentally ill inmates to facilities with better psychiatric care. But many remained, and new mentally ill inmates continue arriving. Jack Powers was one of them. Repeatedly suicidal, repeatedly self-harming, repeatedly exhibiting clear signs of severe mental illness. The response: keep him in isolation, monitor him, but don't move him. Eventually Powers was transferred, but only after 12 years and a lawsuit that brought national attention to ADX's treatment of mentally ill inmates. How many others are currently in suicide prevention cells at ADX right now, at this moment, being treated for suicidal ideation caused by isolation with more isolation? Dozens. Maybe more. ADX doesn't release those statistics. 4 a.m. The darkest hour at ADX. Dawn is still hours away. The inmate in his cell is wide awake, lying on his concrete bed, staring at the ceiling. He's thinking about everything and nothing. Memory is distorted in isolation. Past events replay with perfect clarity, then vanish. Faces of family members appear in his mind, then fade. Conversations from years ago echo in his thoughts, word perfect, then dissolve. Time collapses. Was he arrested yesterday or 10 years ago? Has he been at ADX for months or decades? How long has it been since he touched another human being? He can't remember. The isolation has destroyed his sense of time, his sense of self, his connection to reality. He might be hallucinating right now, seeing faces in the concrete walls, hearing voices that aren't there, feeling insects crawling on his skin even though there are no insects in this sterile concrete box. Dr. Stuart Gratian's research shows that hallucinations in isolation aren't rare. They're common, almost universal in long-term cases. The brain, desperate for stimulation, creates it artificially. Faces, voices, sensations. None of it real, all of it vivid. The inmate in this cell might be entirely psychotic right now and not even know it. How would he know? There's no one to tell him his perceptions are wrong. There's no reality check. There's just him, alone in the dark, with his deteriorating mind. Travis Dusenbury describes this experience. You're buried alive. You're left 24/7 in a fairly small concrete steel cage, a sarcophagus underground. What do you do with yourself? What do you do with your thoughts, your emotions? What do you do with your life? Because what you're looking at isn't much. 6 a.m. 24 hours complete. The inmate wakes on his concrete bed in his concrete cell. Another day begins. Breakfast will arrive at 7 a.m. Recreation at 10 a.m. Lunch at noon. Dinner at 5 p.m. Television in the evening. Lights dim at 9 p.m. The same routine he experienced yesterday. The same routine he'll experience tomorrow, and the next day, and the next, for years, decades, until he dies or is transferred. This is ADX Florence. This is the Alcatraz of the Rockies. This is where America buries its worst criminals alive and watches them go insane. Former Warden Robert Hood reflects on his time at ADX. I found the job to be overwhelming, and I left after 3 years. No staff member had ever stayed there longer than 3 years. The warden, who only had to visit the isolation cells, couldn't handle more than 3 years. He had a home to go to. He had family. He had a life outside ADX. He still found it unbearable. The inmates don't leave. They stay for years, decades, entire lifetimes. And they don't have the option to quit. Robert Hood quit. The inmates can't. Dr. Stuart Gratian, who interviewed dozens of ADX inmates, concludes the degree of the restriction and harshness of the confinement at ADX is so severe that it's going to produce psychiatric symptoms in almost anybody subjected to that degree of isolation for any length of time. Not weak people, not people with pre-existing mental illness. Anybody, everyone. Isolation at ADX is so severe that it breaks all minds eventually. Strong or weak, sane or unstable, genius or average. Everyone breaks. It's just a question of when. In 2012, 11 inmates at ADX Florence filed a class action lawsuit, Cunningham versus Federal Bureau of Prisons, alleging that housing severely mentally ill prisoners in prolonged solitary confinement constitutes cruel and unusual punishment under the Eighth Amendment. The lawsuit detailed horrific conditions. Prisoners with schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, and major depressive disorder held in isolation for years without adequate treatment. Jack Powers was one of the named plaintiffs. His self-mutilation, suicide attempts, and deteriorating mental state were documented as evidence of ADX's psychological torture. After 4 years of litigation, the BOP settled in October 2016. The settlement required ADX to transfer prisoners with the most serious mental illness to less restrictive facilities with better psychiatric care. It required ADX to improve mental health evaluations and treatment. It acknowledged implicitly that ADX's practices were causing severe psychological harm. But the settlement changed little. Some mentally ill inmates were transferred. Others remained. New mentally ill inmates arrived. The fundamental problem, that 23-hour daily isolation causes mental illness regardless of prior diagnosis, was never addressed. ADX still operates the same way today. 490 men still live in 7 by 12-foot concrete cells with no human contact. They still eat meals alone. They still spend 23 hours daily in isolation. They still go insane at predictable rates. The lawsuit proved ADX causes psychological torture. The settlement admitted it. Nothing fundamentally changed. Travis Dusenbury, released from ADX in 2018, describes the lasting damage. I've developed a lot of anxiety about being in large crowds, places with lots of noise, and I've not been able to shake that fully. Years of isolation permanently altered his brain's ability to handle normal human environments. He's free now, but he'll never fully recover. That's the legacy of ADX. Permanent psychological damage that lasts long after release. ADX Florence remains operational today, 30 years after opening. 490 men currently live there in isolation. Some have been there since the 1990s. They'll likely die there. The facility has never had a successful escape. No inmate has ever breached ADX security. In that sense, it works exactly as designed. It contains dangerous prisoners permanently. But at what cost? Dr. Craig Haney, a psychology professor at UC Santa Cruz who studies prison conditions, states, "There's not a single published study of solitary confinement that has not found evidence of some very significant negative psychological effects." Not some studies. All studies. Solitary confinement harms every person subjected to it. Extended solitary confinement, like that practiced at ADX, causes permanent psychological damage in almost all cases. The United Nations Special Rapporteur on Torture, Juan Mendez, declared in 2011 that solitary confinement exceeding 15 days constitutes torture. ADX inmates endure years, decades. Tommy Silverstein, the Aryan Brotherhood member whose murder of 2 guards led to ADX's creation, spent 36 years in complete isolation before his death in 2019. 36 years alone. No human touch. No conversation. No life. Just concrete and madness. Was he still the same dangerous man after 36 years of isolation? Or had isolation destroyed him so completely that he was no longer a danger to anyone except himself? We'll never know. He died alone in his cell, having spent more than half his life buried alive. ADX Florence is America's Alcatraz. But unlike the original Alcatraz, which closed in 1963 because it was too expensive and too harsh, ADX remains open. It remains America's only federal Supermax. It remains a place where prisoners go to lose their minds. El Chapo will die there. Other terrorists will die there. Gang leaders will die there. And all of them, guilty as they are of terrible crimes, will experience psychological torture that experts universally agree violates human rights. Is ADX necessary? Are these prisoners too dangerous to house anywhere else? Or is ADX itself the danger, a facility that creates mental illness, that traumatizes staff, that violates international definitions of torture, all in the name of security? Former Warden Robert Hood answers, "What I have observed of Supermax confinement is that it is as close as anything we have to genuine torture as a standard practice, institutionalized and mandated by law and policy." The warden who ran ADX calls it torture. The UN calls it torture. Medical experts call it torture. But it continues. 490 men buried alive in concrete tombs. Going insane. One 24-hour cycle at a time. That's the reality of ADX Florence, the Alcatraz of the Rockies, where 23-hour daily isolation drives prisoners insane. Jack Powers amputated his own body parts. Travis Dusenbury can't handle crowds after release. Tommy Silverstein spent 36 years alone until he died. The UN calls it torture. Medical experts prove it causes permanent psychological damage. Former Warden Robert Hood says it's worse than death. If this documentary disturbed you, subscribe for more prison stories that expose the truth about America's correction system. Drop a comment. Is ADX Florence necessary security or institutionalized torture? Should solitary confinement exceeding 15